Hello and welcome to episode 104 of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. I'm Guy Swarbrick, and a few weeks ago I sat down with professional racing driver and instructor Steve Deeks to talk about his passion for Alfa Romeo. We talked for so long we turned it into 2 episodes. Part 1 was released in December, and we talked about Steve's early racing career and his links to Alfa Romeo and how that developed into the passion he has for the marque today. Part 2 covers his exploits in the Alfa Workshop 4C and the work he's done with Jamie Porter to help develop that car. It should make sense if you haven't listened to Part 1, but if you want to pause now, catch up and come back, that will work even better. So, Steve, we were talking about Jamie Porter and his persistence when it comes to developing that blue car.
He just won't leave it alone, literally, so he's always tinkering. And when he goes quiet is when he's at his most dangerous, because he's hatching another plan. And it's like, in Jamie world, nothing is not doable. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, and I've worked with some brilliant race engineers, particularly out in Formula 3, Kenny Dornan, more recently, with the Porsche stuff. Jamie, had he have set out to become a top race engineer, would have undoubtedly been one of the gurus, one of the big guys in it, because he's got this mixture of optimism, energy, good humor, right? And a never say die attitude. And some of the stuff that we've done already this year, improving the 4C, it's really exciting because I know that actually we will benefit 4C owners worldwide. I always post, as you've possibly seen, but I make sure that I post to the 4C forum. And the guys in America universally messaged me and begged me to get Jamie to set up out there, and get a branch going out there, because I tell you what was really cool for me was the fact that we had at the beginning a lot of mechanical rear wheel steer, right? And I could feel it in the car, and I thought it's great fun, but it's just like made the car quite inconsistent. It was probably fine for a road car. Actually probably helped it turn. But when you're out on the track and you're always finding the limit and trying to operate around the limit, it would make the back step out in a kind of unpredictable fashion. And it wasn't dangerous, but it was speed limiting. And then, Jamie and I had a big meeting. We were talking about it. And he explained to me how that the geometry of the rear meant that as it went through its arc, that Alfa had actually designed rear wheel steer into it, mechanical rear wheel steer. And I'm like, well, Jamie, because it's not predictable on the racetrack, that's not a positive. So he set about creating, like he did with the front geometry, mechanical parts to change that. So we've now got no rear steer on the car, or much, much less rear steer on the car. And immediately the car went quicker, that we did that. And so that's kind of the process with Jamie, is that we, a bit at a time, I give him the problem, and then I go away and I don't see the car for weeks, and I go back to work and he goes back to work. And then next time I see the car, he's created a bespoke solution for it. And he's incredibly good at doing that. Irrepressible, I'd say, Guy. Probably, I'd say, I'd be somewhere on the autistic spectrum. But I think that gives me an advantage, probably, when it comes to doing these things. Because when I'm in the moment, I'm completely in the moment. And do you know what? Jamie's the same. Right, Jamie's actually the same. Right, we get into that. If you see Jamie at a race meeting when we've got something going on, he's not available to anyone else at that point. He's completely locked into it with a tractor beam. And I'm the same way. And it's really funny because I won't take my partner to the racetrack with me. She never comes when I'm racing, and I wouldn't want her to, right? And I don't need many people to say many things to me on race day, because I want it more than anyone else does anyway. Do you see what I mean? So I don't need that, right? Because it doesn't matter, but I'm completely focused. And I would say with me and Jamie, we share the same thing. I think that in the moment, it's the most serious thing in the world to us. It's not, even though it's just the Alfa Romeo Championship, or, trying to win a championship and nothing to prove and all those kind of stuff. In the moment, I'm enjoying it every bit as much as I ever did, because when that door shuts, I've got a job to do. And I love how much Jamie's enjoyed it this year as well. It's great. It's a great thing to do, to see the pleasure. He and the team, seeing Stuart's face at Silverstone, because we didn't even think we'd finish at Silverstone this last one. And we had people like Ollie Bryant out in the Ford GT40. I thought he was going to be really, really on it, which he was, but not until the end. And Barry Mahone and that Julia's fast with carbon discs. Yeah. And that speeds thing, which eventually caught fire, that caught me quite quickly. And I thought, I said to the boys, so I don't think the brakes are going to last. There's every chance I'm going to have to retire out of this one. And you've got to understand that. And we all understood it. So to end the season winning it, I think for Jamie, it's a lot of work, energy, effort goes into the car, doesn't it?
And it was, in many ways, it was the wrong conditions for the 4C, wasn't it? Because it was very low grip. It was bloody cold.
It was cold, yeah.
Which won't have helped.
No. But I mean, it's good for the engine.
Yeah.
That's probably why I lost. That's my excuse for losing the back. But
I was losing grip on my shoes. It was that cold.
That was. But what amazing! I said Jamie and I both got the taste for it then, because it's amazing to have 40 cars or whatever it was on the grid. It looked fantastic.
Well, if I think about that blue car when I first drove it around about this time last year at Snetterton in the wet, and no aero.
Okay, yeah.
It was pre all of these suspension changes. So what would you say were the major steps forward that they've taken during the year? There's the rear wheel steer, obviously.
Yep. And then I said to him from the first time he drove the car, I said, you're going to run a wing on the rear because this car is properly fast, right? And at some stage, originally when I joined, I think Ted was, and I understand it, Ted was keen initially. He didn't like the idea of the wing because of the fact it's such a pure looking car. And the aero is fantastic for a road car, I think, anyway, right? But I knew that we could carry so much speed potentially with that chassis that it was going to benefit us to have some aerodynamic rear grip. That definitely cleaned it up. We've gone to wider tyres. That took a little bit of getting used to. Again, another step forward, in terms of the speed. And so we've been chipping away at it throughout the season. And I have to say, if you took the package on that car and put it on a road car, honestly, on a track day, I doubt there'd be that much that would be quicker than that.
Yeah.
You could probably take 4C, buy one for, let's just say, normally 45,000, although I think they're going up a bit now. Take it to Jamie, do the engine, do the suspension work that he's done, and you'd end up with, realistically, $100,000 car with all the stuff on, the nitron suspension, all the things you've done, the aero package on it. You'd have $100,000 car that would harass 200,000 pound cars on a track day. I mean, it's an incredible package, and we're still moving it forward. But what happens, of course, when you do these things is you move the problem somewhere else. So at the last race we did, which was the all-comers, we had brake pedal collapse in testing, in qualifying.
I saw Jamie having 4 attempts at working out how he was going to get into the pedal box in the paddock at Silverstone.
Yeah, poor Simon, actually. I mean, our other engineer, Simon, was in quite a lot of pain, I think, lying down on the paddock floor. It's not the easiest thing to work on, but bear in mind though, Guy, at the beginning of the season, we didn't have any problems with the brakes. I listened to Jamie's podcast that you did with him, and he was talking about, the brakes are never a problem. You just press the button and they pull you up short. Well, in that last race, I ended up in testing on the Grand Prix circuit. And bear in mind, we were testing on the National, and I'm not even kidding. The pedal collapsed and we went straight off. We're lucky as well because I work with EBC and they give us phenomenal pads. And it wasn't a pad issue. It was actually an issue that we've reached the limit of brake cooling. We need bigger brakes and we need better cooling for the brakes now. And that's inevitable, as you go quicker. And believe it or not, the other thing that is restricting us, funnily enough, I mean, bear in mind that Jamie's 4C, and that shows the man's engineering chops, really, isn't it? It's the only 4C in the world, as far as we know, with a 6-speed manual shift, which bizarrely everybody wants because half of the Americans that contact me want that shift. But actually, the reality is we want the paddle shift. If we could find a paddle shift where the clutch would take the pressure and the torque.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting. That is definitely also a limiting factor. We'll go immediately quicker when we've got either paddle or sequential. So at the moment, that is the whole process, like somewhere like Cops with dropping a gear. It's not so much about the time banging the gear in, although it is. It's about you have to heel and toe when you're doing that. Yeah. And that process takes time. Whereas if we could just paddle it and just pull on a pedal and bang it down a gear, I'd be able to be back on the gas with the car.
I think this was before we started recording, but we were talking about AI and our distrust of some sort of systems. Are they effectively what you're doing there is asking if you can have a computer to do the heeling and towing for you?
Well, do you know what? You're right. You're right, of course. And on paper, I resisted like that, like everybody else did, because on the road, it's a beautiful thing to do a heel and tow, isn't it? And it kind of is on the racetrack, but
it's just not as quick as not doing it.
It's not as quick. That's the issue. And in the end, when you're chasing performance, and with the way the championship's going to go now, like with the Italian Intermarque, we could have all kinds of powerful Italian things coming in, like Extremas and ex-Ferrari challenge cars, and I hope we do, because it'd be a hell of a spectacle. It'd be a fantastic championship, but you're going to be really needing to find those tenths. There's no doubt about it, because it's going to step up a gear. I can see it. And the problem is for me, like if you take, for example, I ended up going from 5th to 3rd, right, at Beckett's, for example. Originally, I was doing 5, 4, 3, but it wastes too much time. And the problem is there's quite a risk going 5th to 3rd on a manual shift, because what the gear will want to do is it will try and push you into 5th to 3rd. Where am I? 5th to 3rd. Yeah. There's a danger there that you'll go back into 5th, because the gear lever will resist going into 3rd, because it's such a big step up in the revs, the RPMs. And so I think if you've got a sequential, you remove that risk. So it's just more positive that immediately you're going to be in the right gear. You can get straight back on the gas and get it balanced.
So is that a planned winter project, or is that further down the road at this stage?
No, do you know what we are talking about? It's actually really hard to get without going for a full race shift, which kind of goes out the spirit of it, because we want to keep it all alpha. Of course we do. But we are looking at that hard, because we know, because I followed Mike Hilton around Zandvoort in his, that's a beautiful car that Bianca prepared for him, and it's a beautiful car. And the air on, that's fantastic. It's got like biscuit, and Jamie knows it. Like, we need a splitter, right? And because Mike's was designed properly, built for him. Whereas that rear wing on our car, by the way, Jamie got that off a Lotus Exige. I don't know if you knew that, but that's where that came from. So that's not a bespoke,
but similar size and shape. So not a ridiculous thing to put on it.
No, totally not. I mean, I think the guy, who had the Exige might have been a bit disgruntled when back to him. Notice his ring was gone. But it's not as technical. Mike's one on his car was technical, and I followed that car around Zandvoort enough to see how beautiful handling it was. But I'd say one of the key advantages, Mike told me this actually. Mike said that manual gear shift's costing you like a second and a half around somewhere like Zandvoort. So we know that is a barrier. At a certain point, that'll become a limiting factor. And definitely front grip. And we need, ideally, that car needs to have carbon front, at least, rotors. And usefully, we discovered that the rear rotor off a quad fits the 4C. So, but we need dispensation to run that, and we need to engineer it, because we'll probably run steels on the rear, carbons on the front. So, but Guy, that's from someone like me, it's just a fantastic project, a really interesting project to be looking at these things and saying, look, Jamie, if you do that, I think it'll be better. And some of it is simple things, like we've got a great dash in there, but as soon as the sun comes out, I can't see it. So there's some of it simple stuff like building a shroud. Yeah. Make it a canopy like we used to have in helicopters, because, the bit we didn't talk about is amongst all this racing, when I stopped first time round, I went off to become a pilot. So like in a helicopter, we'd always have a shroud around the instrument binnacle. So when the sun's coming into the bubble, we could see it. And just using those kinds and little things as well. Like one of the first things I asked Jamie to put in the car was a dead pedal for the clutch. I mean, that sounds a simple thing, Guy, but the reality is you need to brace yourself. In a car like that, particularly with so much G-force through the corners, when it loads up, you need to brace yourself. And there's a real danger if you don't. Two things happen. One, you might catch the clutch pedal, and without realizing it, your weight on your leg pushing out is going to push the clutch down. But also, it's, really clumsy. If your foot's having to come off the floor, or just from hovering in the air to try and find the clutch when you need it in a hurry. You get what I mean? To do a heel and toe. And we moved the pedals around so that, and this was all good stuff I guess I learned in single-seaters, which is that it's absolutely critical that when the brake's on hard, it lines up with the accelerator, because if the brake sinks below the accelerator, heel and toe is going to be almost impossible to do. And then you will be locking your rears up. And you might get away with that in a drive, but in that car, as you find out, it's very easy to spin it.
It is.
And even if, fortunately for Jamie, I'd just come off the back of taming that 911 SC, which took years to get to work properly, but it went really quickly in the festival. When we sorted the 911, eventually we got it to handle superbly. I finished 5th at the festival in it with the lead group, and then we just made that car handle. 4C is clearly not nearly as bad as the 911 because the engine isn't physically hanging out the back like it does in 911. But if you look at where the engine is in the 4C, it's not optimal because it sits up high in the back of the car. So, for example, when you're braking hard, someone like Druids, actually what happens is it wants to seesaw over the top of you. If you think of where the forces go, and so these are all issues that make that car, as you discussed, unstable, right? Fundamentally, as well as the stuff that was in the geometry, which Jamie got rid of. But you can't change the physicals of where the engine is in the car. And so I've always been aware with that car. I mean, it was nearly embarrassing at Silverstone because when I came out for qualifying, I was in the mood to crack on a bit and I didn't warm the tyres up properly. And so as we left the collecting area by the medical centre, you're very apt by the medical centre. I went left at Brooklands, like trying to warm it up, weaving around, left foot on the brake, right out of Luffield 2, and I squirted it before the rears were up to temperature, and it bit so hard, the throttle, that the back end came round. And I knew that if I actually tried to opposite lock it at that point, I'd spin and probably damage it. So I literally had to let the wheel go backwards and forwards through my hands. And I was fishtailing down the National Straight. I think it was just about pointing straight by the time I got to Cops. And that's the problem with the car, as you experience. Yeah. You don't have to, because it's got so much torque, right? You don't have to get it too wrong before you've got a big problem on your hands, especially when the tyres are cold.
Yeah. So if he'll hate me for saying this, but if you had one wish for next season, what was the one thing you would want Jamie to improve before you go out in it again?
Wow. Do you know, that's a really good question. I'm going to have two, because the brakes definitely now, because we've reached the limit of the brakes, and bear in mind, that's not a criticism of the car, because it was designed for 240 brake, not 500. Right. So brakes, and I want a front splitter. But the funny thing about the front splitter is that is a definite double-edged sword, because if it makes the car more pointy as we turn in, we've got to make sure that we don't get so much rotation at the turning point that it becomes uncontrollable. Or I don't really mean uncontrollable, but you lose a lot of time if you have to get back out of the throttle. But the funny thing about the car, Guy, is actually I really love the little race car. And again, most of the cars during my racing career have been tools, really. Right. And I loved my 1989 Van Diemen Formula Ford because I won races in that and I felt really bonded to it. And I love this car because it's an incredible project. And you've got to admit, it's damn pretty.
Oh, it is lovely. It is lovely.
So pretty.
I guess, compared to some points in your career, it must be quite nice to be able to do these experiments without a huge amount of pressure on you, because it's not a championship that it matters whether you win. It's obviously nice to win races and nice to win trophies, but it's a development project that's taking place on a series of race tracks over the course of a year.
Do you know, I've had an absolute ball this year. And that's Jamie, Simon, Stuart, the team, right? Isabel. And it's a fantastic thing. And, Jamie and I turned up in Zandvoort and there are all these trucks there lined up in the paddock. And, we've got Jamie's wife's Stelvio and a trailer, and it's like Jamie's just working flat out the whole time. There were 3 races and the qualifying session. And I've had great fun with it. But as you rightly say, it's such a fascinating project. I feel like I'm doing exactly what I was designed to do at this point, because I love the engineering side of it, really love the process that we're working through to make the car quicker. Love the fact that all around the world, 4C owners are checking in to find out what we've done. And I know that some of this stuff will be used on their cars. Jamie will turn this stuff into engineering solutions that you can buy, unquestionably, like he already has. And I just feel quite honoured to be able to play a part in that. And as you quite rightly say, the weird thing is the pressure thing. The main pressure is, and always has been, the pressure I put on myself. So that hasn't really changed. When I go out there, I absolutely, I'm still training all the time, even at my age, up the gym, out running when I can force myself. I'm training, I watch my diet, I stay fit, and I'm always working on it. And I'm really big on the mental side of the sport as well. Love the sport, still work in the sport. And who wouldn't love driving that car? That's a thoroughbred sports car, and it's not easy. It's not easy. That's a car that could really bite you if you didn't respect it and really think about what you're doing in it. So all the challenge in the world developing the project. But the funny thing about it is I just got lucky with that, Guy, because I bonded with the car, not just the team, but as soon as I got in that, from day one that I was behind the wheel of the car, I thought she's brilliant. I remember thinking, this is not as bad as everybody said it was. I'm not talking about Jamie's derivative. I'm talking about 4C generally. And I felt like that when I drove it on the road. I thought, what a fantastic concept. And do you know what I mean? I think when you start from that point of view, like when I first started using the 911 in anger before it was developed, I thought this is horrible because they are. Like a 79 911 on the racetrack, unless it's fully re-engineered, is not a beautiful thing to drive, especially if you, like me, you come from a single-seater background, because it's just a bad handling, evil thing. Never felt that about the 4C. Always felt from day one that the car had my back. And still do. You know, I thought this thing is like me and it feels alive, actually. That's the truth of it. It feels like, I call it my baby, because that's what it feels like. It feels like, you know, I'm sort of, when I get in the car, I feel really at home. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think that's a perfect place to end.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me to come in. And, you know, and the one thing I would like to say is how great all the Alfa people have been. You know, I joined the AROC, and, you know, we went to the national day, of course, and we've been meeting them at the race meetings, Festival Italia. I met loads of people, and it's just like it was way back in, you know, 93 and 94. I've changed continents, but the community is the same. These are
our
people,
feisty are our feisty all over the world.
Mate, they're in it for the same reason I'm in it. You know, we love it, and the brand is something that we kind of revere with all its, you know, faults and troubles and challenges and everything else. But it's something really, really special. And with the Alfa Workshop, I just feel I'm at home. It is amazing. It is an amazing brand. I mean, it's the thing that kind of pulls us all together. But it's such a history there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it's like the cars are so desirable in so many respects, and not just as not just the modern ones, but when you start to mine back through time.
And I know it sounds a stupid thing to say, but not just the special ones, even the ordinary ones are more special than anybody else's ordinary cars.
Yeah, no, without doubt. And still that era as well. I was working for Honda as their touring car presenter when Tarquini and Co. came in with the 155s, and they just changed British Touring Car Championship. Yeah. There's a magic about them, wasn't there? And it's just, you see those things and they just look, it's just got racing written all over them. Richard Sagani, I mentioned several times, you know, I owe him so much, really, because I used to live with him every winter for 7 years in Miami, you know, and he'd find me a car from his workshop to go around Miami in, and we were approaching sponsors all over the place. But that, you can imagine, like, being a young man at that era in Miami. It was just after, you know, it's the Miami Vice era, and Hammer and stuff. But just being in Miami was like the most exotic thing in the world as like a young guy in his 20s, kind of growing up, but racing out there as well and being involved in that scene and with no money at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, I literally have never, I mean, I've always put, especially in my earlier career, I've always put everything I earned into it somehow, right up until, you know, but to be given the chances, Guy. So I tell you what, I hope it came over in the podcast, but I've ended up with an enormous sense of gratitude to the people like Jamie Porter.
Yeah. And, no, it does come across.
Does it come across, right? But I really am appreciating him because, you know, he puts loads of time, effort and work, and more than anything else, he puts passion in.
Yeah.
That's the single, more than anything else, it's just sheer love of it and love of doing it. And so, you know, to be able to deliver him a few wins during the year and see the team around him and see and then you know, I know it sounds funny, but going to the Alfa Workshop to pick up my road car after like Zandvoort, all the boys in the workshop know what's gone on at the weekend and stuff. Yeah. And there's a palpable sense that we've all done it. They've done their job, Jamie's done his, and I've done my job. And there's a sense of relief too, you know. So, you know, you're asking about, there is pressure on me because I feel enormously a pressure to, you know, to deliver
for them.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I really want it as much as I ever did. That hasn't changed. Weird, isn't it?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Guy.
That's all we have in this episode. We hope it was worth the wait. In the next episode, we'll be sitting down with Owen Reeve and Reeve Taylor, literally the bravest members of the club, who've agreed to do the impossible and succeed David Faithfull as Mito Registrar. Episode 105 will be available to download from 1:30 p.m. on Sunday the 2nd of February from Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, YouTube, Spotify, the club's website, and everywhere else good podcasts are found. Until then, stay safe.